You're listening to the podcast for all of the news, notes, and breakdowns for your Ohio State Buckeyes. This is Sons of the Shoe with Nick Wilson and Spencer German.
Sons of the Shoe rides again. Nick Wilson, Spencer German. It is another lovely day in Buckeye land. I don't know if that's what we're calling it, but as always, we beg your patronage. Please make sure to follow the show, Sons of the Shoe, wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, 923thefan.com, the free Odyssey app. Have I mentioned Apple? Please follow us on Apple. And, of course, you can also follow the show on the 923 The Fan YouTube channel. Just hit subscribe on that bad boy, and then please make sure to like and comment on our videos. Those help us get more eyes on this, help us get more help on this, gets more eyes on this. It's a vicious cycle. But hi, Spencer. How you doing, buddy?
Good, man. Missed you last week, but, happy to be back with you. It's been busy. I know a lot going on in the sports world in general, but kind of the downtime of college football. But luckily for us, there's still a whole bunch of stuff to talk about because Ohio State is in the news cycle constantly, whether it's the latest recruiting stuff going on. I talked a little bit about that last week without you. Some people are putting out their preseason rankings already, which I know we'll get to. Very much. Oh, and obviously the college football game is a pretty big deal. That's getting closer. So excited to get into all this stuff with you, man.
I'm excited to be back. Thank you for covering for me last week. I will say, can I get some big portal news? I mean, I feel like that first round of portal, in January gets everybody so gussied up, and it's a little anticlimactic this time around. I know they've had a few guys go into the portal, haven't really landed anybody of note yet, although I know they have a preferred walk-on who is like a former D2 player. So I just am ready for a little portal excitement. I want to live a little bit, but you mentioned the preseason rankings. Joel Klatt calls Ohio State his number one team in the country. He referred to them as, quote unquote, a super team. And then Ari Wasserman gave his top 10 post-spring practice rankings, and Ohio State was atop there. I believe Ari has also referred to Ohio State as a super team, given that they have spent $34 million, allegedly, amassing this team. Do you consider Ohio State a super team?
Yeah, I mean, I got into this a little bit last week because I think it was worth bringing it up, given there's going to be more of these rankings, these preseason rankings from certain individuals coming out here in the coming months leading up to the season, and it's kind of crazy to think that we're already at May and college football is going to be. I mean, we're going to be talking about summer practices starting up here in no time, but yeah, I do think, Nick, as we toss around topics, throughout the offseason, like, is it championship or bust for this team? Like, that stuff all comes from, it's all birthed from this idea that they have built this just absolute juggernaut of a program with the way they attack the transfer portal, the guys they brought in, Quinshon Judkins, Caleb Downs, the list goes on and on. And, on top of that, they have this mega recruiting class and others coming sort of following suit in future classes that they're trying to sort of build around and continue to be this powerhouse program, whether it was spurred by Michigan's success or not, like whatever. But I do think that that's certainly the case. So and it's interesting because, I kind of talked last week about a lot of the time with my teams, I like, and this is a Browns fan, Nick, like, I kind of appreciate when my team's kind of able to just fly under the radar and they kind of go unnoticed in that way. I think that's kind of a Cleveland mentality on things. But when it comes to Ohio State, like, I want them to be the number one team in the country. Like that's our expectation for them, is that they're the number one team in the country. So for people to be bestowing that upon them now, I think it just makes sense for what we kind of expected.
Yeah, I mean, I always have loathed the super team moniker because it comes with such a connotation, like it comes with that evil empire, it's the Yankees, it's the Warriors with Kevin Durant. I'm trying to think of the last, it's Tampa Bay with Tom Brady and Gronk and literally anybody else who used to be good at football back for a couple year stretch in Tampa. Like, those teams can be really hard to root for because there already is such a wealth of success. In this case, there's been a wealth of success for Ohio State. It just hasn't been at the level. It hasn't been going 12-0 and going to the, win the Big Ten and then going right into the playoffs. And, they've had a playoff trip here. They've had 2 in the last, 3 or 4 years. But I think when you get to it, I've always loathed the super team moniker because it ends up feeling something different. This is like all hands on deck. This is, you know what, or get off the pot for Ryan Day. So the expectations are already going to be there. The downside of being a super team is the expectations come and they come immediately. And if you deviate in even the slightest form from those expectations, there's question and there's panic and there's uncertainty, and that can destabilize the best of teams. Well, that pressure is always going to be already going to be here this year because we're going on another year with Ryan Day. You have not won a championship yet. You haven't beaten Michigan in several years. That pressure's there. So it doesn't matter if they're a super team or not. That pressure was going to be there this year. So I choose to look at it as, yes, they're a super team. They're a super team because they went out there and they just emptied all the guns. If at the end of this year you don't beat Michigan and you don't win a national championship okay, the question's answered. You were given your best team. We swapped out quarterbacks. I thought that was a huge thing holding them back last year. Yeah, you lost Marvin, but you have a butt ton of talent on both sides of the ball. You effectively are who Michigan was last year, where Michigan had all those super seniors and all that talent and all that depth. That's why they had, 13 players drafted this year, a record for them. That's who you are this year. So the expectations are always going to be there at Ohio State. Michigan in some ways flew under the radar because there was still are they really a national championship team, or
they didn't play anybody?
Yeah. Like there were so many, even going into the season, very, very talented, but that skepticism of, it's nice to beat Ohio State, but you got trounced in the playoffs. How real are you on a national level? There's none of that with Ohio State. There is Ohio State, I don't think will ever fly under the radar ever again because of the money and the visibility and the gap that they have versus almost everybody else, and about all but maybe 4 teams in the Big Ten and like another 130 teams in college football. So if that's already going to be there, you might as well get the fruits of that, of being a super team, which is you went out there and you spent every friggin' cent you possibly could to build the mother of all teams.
Yeah, and you mentioned, Michigan flying under the radar a little bit last year, and even with I meant, I threw out there the schedule they played being sort of soft up until that Ohio State game, and that was a big talking point for them, just in regards to whether or not they were actually good enough to win the championship. Had they been battle tested, all these different things. I also think, Nick, in the Big Ten now, that's not going to be the case anymore. You can't run and hide in the Big Ten as much as you used to when you're adding teams like USC, when you're adding teams like Oregon, and Ohio State obviously has Oregon on their schedule this year on top of the usual suspects, your Penn States, your Michigan, all that. So yeah, I don't know that's going to be as easy for any team in the Big Ten to sort of fly under the radar anymore. But I also think too, your point, you hit the nail on the head. I at Ohio State, and you bring up there's always going to be that pressure. Think about Texas, right? Texas, since the Mac Brown days, they kind of fell off the radar. Not off the radar, but they sort of dwindled in terms of their success on the field. Let's put it that way. Because the point I'm trying to make here is that even with that in mind, even knowing that Texas was a team that maybe wasn't quite as – they weren't winning the national championships like they were with Vince Young in the greatest Rose Bowl game ever played against USC in the early 2000s. That wasn't them anymore. But even just the brand Texas comes with a level of expectation, and came with a level of expectation all those years where they couldn't get the coaching hires right, to the point where now they have Steve Sarkisian and they are actually competing now for championships. They made the playoff this past year. So yeah, you're right. Even in a year where Ohio State maybe has a down year, they're still going to be talked about like one of those teams. There's still going to be pressure to win and perform on the field and have that success and beat Michigan and at least make the playoff and make some noise, even if people can accept okay, this year's not maybe a championship season, because that's just what Ohio State is. So I'm with you. If that's going to be the case, if Ohio State is going to always be one of these brands that is notable in everybody's mind And hey, Ohio State, that means something when you hear that name pop up on your screen, you see that name pop up on your screen, or you hear that name talked about as a college football program, then yeah, lean into that. Go out and build yourself a super team. So, and yes, that does come with a little extra pressure, which is kind of the point, again, like I hit on last week. But I think the thing is, when you come to Ohio State, you're anticipating that anyway. Like any of these guys who were signing on to come to Ohio State, they understand what that means. They understand what that school and the program breeds, and that is, you're supposed to win national championships when you come there. So I don't think anyone's running and hiding from that. And I just think like, okay, yeah, fine. If you're going to add some pressure to yourself, I think that's fine. But I think people around that program, within that program, whatever, they're up to that task because they expect it anyway.
So I think there's an important point we might have overlooked here as well. When it comes to Ohio State being everybody's preseason favorite. And I don't know that I expect them to be number one in the preseason top 25 AP poll. I would be shocked if they weren't one of the two highest ranked teams, though. Like I think it will be Ohio State.
You think Georgia's going to be one?
I think it's Ohio State and Georgia. And I think the difference is Georgia has a pretty consistent track record of being Georgia.
And an incumbent quarterback.
Yeah, I think there's maybe a Heisman favorite. Where I think Will Howard's going to be a little bit more of a long shot. But here's another reason why I think it's important that they're seen as the top dog, that they're seen as a super team, that the expectations remain the same. Because I got to be honest with you, I think Ryan Day has been hit and miss with how he handles the pressure of being an Ohio State coach. There was the very funny, but I think to a lot of people outside of Columbus, odd Lou Holtz beef this year. There have been other instances where is Ryan is he playing the face? Is he playing the heel? His handling of kind of the national media, like those are all things that are still questions for him. And so while the biggest questions are, can you win a national championship and can you get back to beating Michigan, and not just beating Michigan, but dominating Michigan? Those are all fair questions. There are questions under the surface of, is Ryan Day really cut out for this? And so to have this year kind of be the ultimate prove it year and the come to fruition year where this roster is as complete as you've had since maybe 2016, like we start to look at the NFL dudes on this team, you got 6, maybe 7 potential first rounders, probably 10 to 15 draftable guys. Oh, and by the way, like if you look at how it's built, Ryan Day's had plenty of time to build it. He's swapped out quarterbacks. Like all the excuses are out here, and now it's just time. Can Ryan Day continue to navigate and get comfortable with himself while being the hunted? Because I got to be honest with you, every time Ohio State has been the hunted his entire time there, when they failed to meet expectations, his reaction to it, I don't want to say alarming, but some of his reactions have been puzzling. And I just think this is a good year to kind of put it all together, show that you're comfortable in your own damn skin. You know who you are. This is Chip Kelly's offense. Like, no questions. Just go out there and win the whole effing thing. And it's set there for you. So I think the Ryan Day part of this is another reason why I'm like, hell yeah, they're number one. Hell yeah, put those expectations on there and let's see Ryan handle that pressure maybe a little bit more evenly than he has.
So I think what's interesting about that is, like, I think Ryan Day needs to, I don't know if the right phrasing is like take himself less seriously. But like, I am curious to see if he's able to like actually embrace this CEO role that he's talked about, where he can kind of just like oversee it all. And hopefully that does take some pressure off of him. Like, there's always going to be pressure, but if he can just kind of accept, like, all right, look, I'm in a different spot now. And I'm able to just kind of focus my attention over here, and I don't have to feel all this pressure of like calling the plays every week and all this different stuff. So I'm kind of fascinated to see how that plays out. And I agree, like, he just has to kind of be comfortable in his own skin now. And if he can do, like, I'm interested to see how this kind of evolves with the pressure that's on them this year with the team he's built, but also how he just how he handles that responsibility, the different look or perspective that he's now taking to the program. But Nick, like, the whole point of bringing in Chip Kelly is that some of that pressure gets taken off of him. Like that's the hope, right? Is that it allows him to kind of free himself up to be more free and easy and not so over the top yelling about Lou Holtz after a game, because there's a little bit less pressure when he has kind of actually he's actually embraced this idea of like delegating things, right? He doesn't feel like he has to have his hand in the play calling basket because he's got somebody he can trust there. How much trust are you putting in that guy? Are you enabling Chip Kelly to actually do this thing? The guy who basically molded you into the coach that you're supposed to be. So I'm fascinated to see how that plays out too. But in an ideal world, like, yeah, there's always going to be pressure at Ohio State for the head coach. And he knows going into this year, like if he doesn't beat Michigan, he probably is looking for a job next year. So yes, there's pressure there. But the setup he's now built, even with the roster that they've assembled being as talented as it is, should allow him to take a deep breath, relax a little bit, and just go out and do what he loves, which is coach college football.
Well, and the second you beat Michigan and win a national championship, that pressure clock restarts and it goes all the way down to zero. And it buys you time. And it doesn't buy as much time as a championship buys you at Michigan, but it buys you time.
To an extent, I definitely listen, all the Fire Ryan Day talk goes away with all that. I do think at Ohio State, when you win a national championship, then it becomes, all right, we'll do it again. So it's not that I think it goes down to zero necessarily. Like I think there's still going to be pressure because there's going to be, okay, now you got to repeat. Now you got to get back there again because that's just how this fan base is. And we know that. But you're right. Like it alleviates you from all the talk about not fit for the job and fire this guy every time something goes wrong and showing up at Ohio Stadium with torch and pitchforks. Like that all goes away if you go out and you have the season that this super team is supposed to have, which includes beating Michigan and ideally at least making it to the national championship game, if not winning it.
All right, guys, are you comfortable with Ohio State being referred to as a super team? Are you happy that they're seen by various Ari Wasserman, Joel Klatt as being the number one team in the country, given all the pressure that it comes with that? Leave a comment there on our 92.3 The Fan YouTube channel or at Nick Wilson Says, at Spencito _ on Twitter, and for me on Instagram as well. Slide into those DMs. Get after it. But when we come back, we will get into the latest reports on the college football game, which have both Spencer and I quite intrigued on 92.3 on the Sons of the Shoe podcast. But first, a quick word from our sponsors. Hey guys, Nick and Spencer back with you here. And Spencer, how excited? Just every little report excites you about the new college football 25 game as it does me. I'm very in tune with this. I actually have on my the Sunday show that I host on 92 Through the Fan, as you mentioned at the end of the last segment there. Nice segue, huh? I do this bit with my board op Dominic, where I give him 90 seconds to give us all the updates every single week on what's coming out with this video game. So I'm in tune with this stuff. I'm always paying attention. I have been scouring Facebook Marketplace to acquire a PS5 at a more reasonable price so that I too can play this game alongside all of you once the game drops. So of those updates so far, what is your favorite thing you've heard about this?
The stuff that intrigues me the most right now, other than like when they give us the official date it's going to drop and all that, which we're all kind of holding out for. And I know there's a new trailer that's supposed to come out, I think, this week, which I'm really excited about that. But the thing I've been like really amped about, I guess, is just the different voices that they have in the game, where you have like, Kirk and Chris Fowler, all the guys that we know, doing these broadcast, like doing the pretend broadcast to record it into the game, and how they kind of provide updates on like, yeah, we have stuff for this situation, we have stuff for that situation, and when your quarterback throws their fifth pick six, we have a commentary on it. Like, so I think that's kind of the stuff that I've been kind of geeking over right now as we kind of have this lull. But obviously the day, I remember we talked about it, the day that first trailer that literally had nothing in it other than the guy who was just sitting there like a desk in the middle of the college, was it the Rose Bowl, and he was just like writing, or he was like stitching like jerseys together or whatever. Like even that got me excited. So I'm waiting for the next trailer. I think is the big thing, and then obviously the release date, which I'm assuming will be in the trailer. Maybe I think.
So it's funny you say that. I every time I hear something, I'm like, oh my God, that's cool. Oh my God. I'm just ready to go back to I'm like everybody else. I love taking a Bowling Green, a Charlotte, an App State, a Rice or Tulsa. I love taking them and building them into a juggernaut. And I also love messing with like conference realignment. Love that as well. I do wish that we could get some sort of like you could switch on some sort of relegation system because I've had a dream of a Big Ten greater and a Big Ten lesser. But that's maybe a legends and leaders, maybe a legends and losers.
Legends and losers.
But no, I really like. I am
Where's
so
James
excited.
Franklin end up?
I'm so excited about this, and like it's so funny because I always make my way to being Ohio State's head coach.
Yeah,
I don't really have an interest in being USC's head coach. I don't really, favor being Oklahoma's coach. I could never be Michigan's head coach. I'm just not built like that. But it's so funny. I'll spend like 10 years kicking everyone's ass at Bowling Green, and I'll be like, I've earned it now. Now I can go. Now I can go to the big time. I can finally go to Ohio State. I've earned it.
You know what's funny about like that you bring up not being Michigan's coach? It's funny that like we are so ingrained in this rivalry that we're like, no, in a make-believe video game, I will never be, and we think that somehow is sticking it to Michigan. Like we think that's really going to get in the craw of our Michigan listeners, especially on the YouTube channel that I know tune into the show and try to troll us in the comments. Like we think it's really going to stick it to them that we would never in college football 25 or any version of this game that comes out in the future will never agree to be Michigan's head coach, which I think is part of the fun of the game itself, is that these rivalries like take their form within your competitiveness in the game, which is just awesome in its own right. But also, yeah, like I'm really excited about the recruiting because I used to love in the old games, like you dedicate like, okay, I'm going to give this much time to talking about the national broadcast that we get. And I'm going to spend this much time talking about like how much playing time the player is going to get. I'm anticipating that a lot of that stuff is going to be like microtransactions, which kind of sucks, but I hope there's a good balance between the two where it's like, you don't have to like pump a whole bunch of money into it to just land the best recruits. Like you can actually still do it with, the true, you want
to grind it out on the road and you
just want to
make it honest.
Listen, the microtransaction thing is obviously just a money grab for the game, for the company, all that. So I get why they do it. And I'm not saying I won't put any money into that type of stuff because I can already tell you I will, but I just don't want it to be like there was a couple years ago, like NBA 2K20, maybe the one that had Kyrie Irving on it or whatever the hell it was, where it was like everything was so microtransaction based that it was so hard to just like grind your way to actually being a good player. It sucked. So I don't want it to become that, but I'm looking forward to the recruiting. I also was the guy who I always loved that you could like pick your out of conference opponents each year on the schedule. And so I would always do like normally on a schedule, you'd see like a home and home against some random team. I would just every year book a Boise State at Boise State matchup just to play on the blue turf every single year. Now I got more options because you got the teal turf down at Coastal Carolina. You got red. I think somebody has red turf somewhere. So I got all kinds of options for those kinds of fun matchups that I want to include in my schedule when I make my schedule.
Now, the other big talking point on the game is who was on the cover edition on the PlayStation. The PlayStation. What is it? The PlayStation Store.
Yeah.
And Ohio State is represented. I saw Travis Hunter, Edwards from Michigan. I'm looking at it right now. I'm trying to see.
Quinn Ewers was on there, I think.
Yeah, Quinn Ewers. Although he's covered up by the college football 25 deluxe edition sign there. Did big EA Sports get it right putting Quinshon Judkins as the representative for Ohio State?
So I think what's interesting about this is like this kind of got me down this rabbit hole of thinking who is the most maybe notable Ohio, and I'm not even saying from like us, like we talk about this team on a weekly basis. We're in tune with what's going on the recruiting trail and the roster and all this different stuff. You can tell me who you think it is. I was kind of guessing that between us, we would probably say that Caleb Downs is maybe the biggest notable name on this roster. Either him or maybe Jeremiah Smith coming in as a freshman. But I also understand why maybe they didn't want to put a freshman on the game, and there's obviously room for him to take that role. Am I wrong about that?
No Travion Henderson?
Well, so I actually think, but so I'm saying from like our perspective, if we're thinking like of the biggest name player, because we're in tune with like the recruiting cycle, Caleb Downs is like a generational talent that like regarded as that coming from like out of high school to Bama and out of Ohio State. So that's why I kind of thought that. But I actually think from like a national perspective, Travion Henderson is probably the most notable Ohio State name. So I actually was surprised that he wasn't the person they chose, because I think outside of just like Ohio State circles, that's the name that most people nationally would know, even more so than Quinshon Judkins. Like I had a friend who had never even heard of Quinshon Judkins. They were like, "Who's Quinshon Judkins?" And I was like,
yeah.
He led the SEC in rushing 2 years ago. Like, you don't know who Quinshon Judkins is? And he was like, "Nope, I don't." I was like, that's kind of surprising to me. So I actually thought Travion would be the name they picked, because from a national perspective, that seems like the name people would know the most.
I also think like you don't have to go offensive players. Like I'm surprised actually they didn't go more quarterbacks. Like I would have expected Shedeur Sanders instead of Travis Hunter.
Well, I was thinking, you know what's interesting about that though? I wondered if that was like a Dion thing. Like is Shedeur's in the game? I'm pretty sure, but I wondered if he was like, "Nah, man, like they can't pay my son enough to be the cover," like something like that. Like I could see that kind of being the thing with them. At least I think Shedeur's in the game.
I can't even dispute that because Dion's such a fucking space cadet. All right, but with that said, I also like defensively, because to me, this is not like Quinshon Judkins is a really nice player. He just hasn't earned it at Ohio State. I have no doubt that he will this year. But like, give me a JT Tuimoloau. You know, give me and I know these are not sexy names outside of here, but I'll take a Caleb Downs. Give me a Denzel Burke. Like, it's so funny. Like last year, this team was about a pretty damn good defense and Marvin Harrison Jr. And obviously late in the year, Travion. But like, it's one of those things where the players that I'd most like to see there, like JT Tuimoloau might be one of the most underrated players going into this year, because it kind of felt like for whatever reason last year, his dominance. I mean, one, he was not consistently dominant. He had some moments late in the season where he was not the same level of player, but like that's because we're holding him to a ridiculous standard. So it's just funny. I would have chosen like 8 guys over Quinshon Judkins. Like there's a part of me that because of the things you heard about Quinshon coming out of Ole Miss, like I'm still not sold. Like I'm sold on the football player, but I'm still not sold that this isn't just a guy who's here because of the nice price tag and the fact he gets to go off into the NFL after this year. Like there's a part of me he doesn't feel like a Buckeye yet. And I guess maybe that would preclude Caleb Downs as well. But
well, that's why I think it did feel a little bit weird. Like, and that's why I think what was interesting about it was the sort of different perspectives I took on it. Like I do think like us being in tune with Ohio State in general and what they've done on the recruiting trail, like having Jeremiah Smith, we would have been like, oh, hell yeah. Like that would have been awesome. Having Caleb Downs, I think would have been awesome. Having JT Tuimoloau would have been awesome. Like we all think that those guys are standout players that we probably would put higher on the list than Quinshon Judkins. I think honestly, like just because he's a quarterback, I think Will Howard would have even maybe made more sense on the cover than Quinshon Judkins because he's a quarterback. But I also understand where they don't want to do just quarterbacks. So yeah, I do think if you're talking just like if you were to go around the country and like poll people, like name me an Ohio State Buckeye player right now on the team. Maybe people from Bama would know Caleb, like people in the South might know Caleb Downs a little bit more because he played at Bama. And he was either recruited by other schools in the SEC. But I think like nationally, they probably would say Travion Henderson would be the most popular name that would pop up. That's my guess. So I actually thought they would go, especially if you're going to pull from the running back room. I was shocked they didn't go with Travion Henderson.
Well, and it's just funny. Like, I just think every other player on there, you can go, that's a person I think of. Like, yeah. When you think of Quinn Ewers, Texas has plenty of good football players. You think of the quarterback that started the last 2 years. When you think of Colorado, when you think of college football, you do think of Travis Hunter because he played two ways. Even if you think Shedeur Sanders, Travis is not too far off that. At Michigan, you don't really think of anybody because all their biggest stars left. But again, you got to have Michigan.
Well, I think Donovan Edwards is one of the ones who was on there too.
No, he was. Yeah.
So yeah.
So I meant like it's not JJ McCarthy. It's not, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's funny. I'm not outraged by it. I was just kind of like, oh.
Let me ask this: does it feel like? And I don't mean this in a like we just spent a segment talking about Ohio State's a juggernaut. So I'm not saying they shouldn't be represented, but does it feel like they almost just tried to like they just tried to kind of like squeeze Ohio State on there because it's Ohio State, but they didn't really have the like think about it. Last year it would have been easy. It would have been Marvin Harrison Jr. obviously, but like Ohio State right now doesn't necessarily have that nationally renowned player that is coming up in a lot of conversations right now. They're kind of like the sum of their parts is this juggernaut team, but there's nobody outside of Columbus or outside of the Ohio State sphere that we're in where we know the roster and who's good and who's not that stands out as like, oh, that's a superstar player to, I think, the national college football conversation. Does it feel kind of that way?
I would guess it was more important just to have Ohio State represented on there rather than who it was from the EA Sports side of things, which again, I'm happy to be represented. I will say there were plenty of great schools that you don't even get to see the name. You just get to see the helmet or the, you just know because of the uniform getup. Quinshon Judkins is the
real quick, Nick. The last thing I was just going to say was too. To be fair, I think they kind of did the same thing with Michigan because I think you had to put Michigan on have a cover out there because they just won the national championship. But like that, I mean, that team just got gutted, right? Like everybody pretty much went to the NFL. The only player I can really think of off the top of my head that stands out on their roster is Donovan Edwards. So it makes sense that he's the guy. But I think it's the same sort of thing there where they were like, well, we got to get him on there. So let's just pick somebody who kind of stands out.
Quinshon Judkins is the Ohio State cover athlete for the college football 25 video game. How do we feel about this? Hit us up in the comments. When we come back, though, it's a new Big Ten. But first, a quick word from our sponsors. All right, guys, final segment of today's show, and this is really our first chance to get a look at the new Big Ten, and with Oregon and USC and UCLA, with all the former Pac-12 teams coming in this year. Is anybody else, like, I'm kind of excited to see the new Big Ten. Like, I don't view the death of something like the Pac-12 with these weary eyes or, oh, college football. No, I think I just think it's more of a chance to see more premier programs in this conference, which means less Indiana, less Purdue, less Rutgers. Like, I'm all for that. Like, the more better teams I can see selfishly. I know it sucks for the Pac-12 and Pac-12 fans. I'm sorry. I'm on the winning side here. I'm very excited for this year.
Well, we get to sit on that soapbox a little bit because we're from the perspective of the Big Ten lens, which is, listen, you're adding better teams to the conference, more competitive games, should be a lot more fun every year in this conference. I think the thing, Nick, for me, that I like that makes me excited about it, like, yeah, it sucks that the Pac-12 gets gutted that way, but I'm excited because every year we have to sit and have these debates about, oh, whose conference is the best, and the Pac-12 is better than people are giving it credit for, and the SEC is just always the best conference, and who has the better bowl game record and all this different stuff. I think that conference realignment is like one of the positive parts of it is that we get a clear picture on those types of questions, right? Like teams like Ohio State are going to get tested more every year. You're not going to get like even I used the example of Michigan earlier in the show. Michigan's not going to have this cakewalk schedule now every year, where they're playing like Purdue and Iowa and Indiana, and then they have this cakewalk of a schedule until the last 2 weeks of the season when they finally play a solid, or I would say one of the better Big Ten teams over the years, but not like a great Big Ten team in Penn State, and then Ohio State. So like to have your team get tested a little bit more, and like people are going to say, well, the games mean less because more teams get in the playoff and all this different stuff. But I also think like it gives you a better barometer as we're trying to map out who should be ranked where and who's really the best team in the country, we'll now know those things a little bit clearer because schedules are going to be a little bit harder. So I can appreciate that. And I'm not going to complain about better, more competitive football games, even if it means I'm sitting on the edge of my seat a few more times for an Ohio State game this fall.
So with that, there's one downside to this new expanded Big Ten, and this is going to be your last chance to like Dan Lanning. I've really enjoyed what he's built at Oregon. There were a lot of coaches after Chip Kelly who had some success and then petered out, or who are outright pretenders. I mean, Willie Taggart and Mario Cristobal just never really got Oregon back to where they were. I think Dan Lanning is a scary mother.
Yeah.
I wish he would have taken the Alabama job, quite frankly. I think Oregon's going to be real tough to contend with. And the reason why it's going to be your last chance to like Dan Lanning, you get him game 6 this year. He is young, brash, really outspoken, but really a bright dude. You can kind of see some Saban-esque stuff there about how he sees the future of college football. And so you look at this and you're like, all right, I'm going to hate that dude. Like that dude is going to be as good as Oregon can and should be. I don't think they're going to do the fallback, we change conferences and you kind of move to the middle of the pack. I don't think you're going to do that. I think Oregon is going to be one of the 4 best teams in this conference for the foreseeable future, and I wouldn't be surprised if it was Ohio State, Oregon playing in the Big Ten matchup or Big Ten title game every single year. That's how much I think of Dan Lanning.
Well, and real quick too, on the point of the benefits of expansion, I think adding teams like Oregon, USC, Washington, UCLA, I think it also makes the Big Ten just overall better, not just because you're adding those teams, but because a team like Iowa, they can't just coast off having a really good defense and scoring 10 points and beating teams that way anymore. Like, they're going to actually have to try to compete for some of these guys and put effort into the NIL stuff and try to bring in more talented players to compete with these teams. So I think that's another benefit of this. And I think you're right. Like, I love Dan Lanning from like an outside perspective, but I am totally embracing for this idea that over the next few years, we're all going to grow to hate him, because I think they're going to be neck and neck with Ohio State every single year. I kind of like the question of, outside of Michigan, Michigan will always be Ohio State's biggest rival, but behind Michigan in this new look Big Ten, Nick, is it Oregon that you think is going to ultimately be like Ohio State's next, like the next rival in place? I think right now you would say it's probably Penn State. But after that, like, is it going to change? Is that sort of hierarchy of who you hate the most going to change outside of Michigan? Again, Michigan stays where they are. That'll never change. But behind Michigan, could you see Oregon becoming maybe that second biggest rival to Ohio State and staying there for a long time?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at this, the most frustrating thing as an Ohio State fan is like Alabama has like 4 great rivalries. It's Alabama, Georgia, and then Tennessee, and then Georgia, and then Florida, and then LSU.
It helps that Tennessee actually finally, won a couple games against them.
That helps. But like, I'll also say though, like, I think that helps sell you as a dominant team. Like, we're so used to the cynicism of, well, you haven't beaten anybody and you don't play Michigan until November. So I think you finally have, like, Oregon is who Penn State was supposed to be. Penn State for the last 8 years. It's Franklin's. It's his year. It's his year. This is fine, and then it's never come to fruition. And so I think you can trust Oregon to be a worthy adversary. And I think in short order, the reality is what truly breeds. If you don't have history, what truly breeds some semblance of a rivalry is just year in, year out, you're vying for the same thing. And Penn State's never been that. Michigan State has not been that since 2016, maybe, since 2017, maybe, since the portal, really.
Yeah. I mean, there was a point after the championship year, and you had that, that great team that came back in 2015 into 2016. And like everyone thought, like, they're a juggernaut. They're going to win it again. They're going to repeat. And then Michigan State pulled off that upset. Like, there was a point where you could probably argue like it was Michigan and Michigan State were like the 2 teams you hated the most, because Michigan State was always grinding your gears every year too. And yeah, like to your point, first of all, there is history because Oregon is the team that you beat in the national championship game several years ago. People forget. it's not that people forget, but I think on that run, people are more the more memorable game was the Alabama one that they won in that playoff run, the first year of the college football playoff. So I think people always think back to that, and they kind of like Oregon's almost a footnote in the conversation. Like, oh yeah, they beat Oregon that year to win the championship. That's right. But like because you have that history there, I think that maybe helps set the foundation of where this could go. But I do think like at least in the near future, while Oregon is a juggernaut and Dan Lanning's there and he's building this thing, I think that is going to be that next team that falls in line. And like you mentioned, they play week 6 this year, I think it is. And then you like if those two teams continue on the trajectories that they're on, like you're going to get them again, maybe in the Big Ten championship game, and whoever wins or loses, like it's going to be a revenge game. And so if you're talking about playing Oregon in like twice a year for the next like 2-3 years, potentially, yeah, like that is a breeding ground for that to become this next great rival that people every year are circling on their calendar and saying, man, I can't wait for that game, or I'm really nervous about that game, or, Ohio State's going to be in trouble in that game. I'm fascinated to see that. I also do think though too, and I don't want to sleep on USC because obviously what Lincoln Riley's building out there is great, and he constantly has really good quarterback play. And I think that could be another fun one because when USC is good, it's good for college football. And USC's got some great rivalries with like another Midwest school in Notre Dame and some of these other programs. Like if USC
quick, though, here's the problem.
Yeah,
they have not been able to capitalize on at points a week in Pac-12. And fair. Obviously Oregon's back. Washington's coming off a great year. I think Washington and Michigan are kind of like one-year wonders to the level that they were. I think they're going to kind of
Washington's going to take a step back.
But like my problem with USC is Miami. USC is Texas. USC is that team that every year we say, are they back? They're back. And then 6 weeks into the season, you're like, oh shit, I guess they're not back. So if USC ever got their crap together, yeah, I'm starting to get really skeptical that Lincoln Riley. I mean, that last year, I can't believe they didn't take more flack for having Caleb Williams, a roster with a lot of talent, and kind of sinking to the middle of the best Pac-12 we had seen in a decade. Now the problem is you're walking into a Big Ten that is even better than that Pac-12. So like I just think the math is really, really hard. You're right that if especially because Lincoln Riley's still a boy wonder despite being like 45 now, I think that could be, you got to put it together. I think it might take him a couple years to kind of get that financial wind flow in and really fix that program though.
I think that's a fair point. Obviously they had massive expectations last year with Caleb Williams. And this is too, you talk about USC getting their shit together. And like, what was the big knock on the Pac-12, right? It was always, it was more so the Big 12 that didn't have good defenses, but the Pac-12 has always kind of been like very offensive centric, right? But I wonder if joining a conference like the Big 10 that is known for sort of these gritty, like the Big 10 has always been like, hard-nosed to good defense, running the football in a lot of instances, conference. And so I wonder if that also becomes a breeding ground for those teams to invest more in those areas. Like, hey, we're in the Big Ten. To win in the Big Ten, you got to be gritty. You have to play good defense. You have to recruit those types of players. So I wonder if that almost helps somebody like Lincoln Riley become build better programs and better teams around just having the elite quarterback that wins you the Heisman Trophy. And look, that comes with plenty of cachet. But you're right. Like to compete in this conference, you're going to need that, especially against the Ohio States and Oregons of the world. My point, I still think Oregon is the answer to this overarching question of like who's maybe next behind Michigan. But if USC could somehow get restored to the days of Pete Carroll where they were a juggernaut every single year, I like the idea of that, like Ohio State going to the Coliseum on a Saturday in October in a high stakes 1 versus 4 ranked game or something like that. Like that is cool. And I understand like you and I have that perspective because we saw USC at their peak, right? Like we saw when they had Reggie Bush, they were competing for national championships and it was awesome. There's a lot of fans who haven't seen that with USC. Like there's plenty of young fans who are like, I don't know, USC when they were doing that, or I was like a baby and I don't remember. So I just think the idea of them getting restored to one of those powers would make that a really, really cool thing if it were to ever happen.
I think Oregon's going to be a national player. I think USC will hang somewhere in the mid-teens for most of the year, like in terms of who they truly are. And I think UCLA and Washington are going to be fighting for relevance in this. And I think it wouldn't surprise me if USC falls into that category. And I think that's what's going to make this really interesting. And I think what's interesting is you've mentioned the Big Ten adjusting to the new teams. I think it's going to be a lot of those teams also having to adjust to the Big Ten, which I think is going to be fun to kind of watch and play out. So, what teams that are joining the Big Ten this year do you guys give the best chance to become another big rival of Ohio State? I definitely put Oregon 1 in bold. USC is conditional.
Agreed.
And then I think it kind of becomes like, can Washington and UCLA consistently compete at this level? Because they didn't consistently do that in the Pac-12. And UCLA, I think
Penn State's really probably still after that. Like Penn State's probably after Oregon, and I would say Michigan. Probably goes Michigan, Oregon, Penn State, USC contingent on USC. But we're also not going to see. I don't know if Ohio State even plays USC next year on their schedule. I have to double check that, but. You have to see those two teams play as well first before we start making that a thing. But
it all changes when Notre Dame finally gets balls and joins the.
Dude, stop! I can only contain my.
You can only be so erect, is what you're trying to say.
I can only get so erect. Notre Dame, Ohio State would be. That might even that could. Be in the conversation with Oregon. Like it could be Michigan, Notre Dame, then Oregon if Oregon stays as a powerhouse. Like that would be fun. I hope it happens, but those damn TV rights on NBC for Notre Dame,
it's snobbishness. That's what it is. That's the only reason Notre Dame they think they're better, and one day very soon they're going to come collect, and that's fine. And we'll give them tons of crap and never let them forget it. All right, guys. Which new Big Ten team do you think has the best chance to become a significant rival of Ohio State as soon as this year? Answer in the comment section on 92.3 The Fans YouTube channel. Hit us up. At Nick Wilson says, at Spencito _ on X, and Nick Wilson says on literally Threads, everything. That I'm very generic on this one, but please make sure to follow the show as well everywhere you get your podcasts. Apple, Spotify. Follow Sons of the Shoe today. Have I mentioned Apple for this week, guys? That does it for us. Spencer, good stuff, buddy. Appreciate you.
Always a pleasure, Nick. Look forward to talking more next week.
Go Bucks.